Hello, everyone, and welcome. It is Sunday night, May 26th, 2024, and my name is Glenn Rawson. Welcome to our devotional. Now, this is not meant to be an instruction in doctrine. It is not even meant to be a recitation of history. This is a devotional, and its purpose is to edify, to inspire, and to help you on a Sunday night end the day with something that feels good. So welcome tonight, and thank you for joining me. I will be sharing some stories, some of which are contemporary and some of which come from our history. Before I do that, please allow me to say thank you again to the VIPs. Now, if any of you, and I have a hard time saying this, but if any of you want to become a VIP, that's really about the only way you can financially support what we're doing with this research and these stories. If you want to be a VIP, go to glennrawsonstories.com. If you'd like to be a weekly subscriber and receive the stories every single week in video or in written form, then go to glennrawsonstories.com. The stories weekly are free. Thank you for all those of you that are receiving them. And if you know somebody that needs them, send them to us. We'd love to have them receive these stories as well. Now, last week, I got the most interesting comment during the fireside. My dear friend, Rod and Suzanne Johnson, left the comment that they were watching in Pocatello with 10 people. Now, I think that's got to be some kind of a record. And it got me to thinking, if you wouldn't mind, drop me a comment. Where are you watching from? And how many are watching this with you? That's always of interest to me. And as always, I ask for your faith and prayers. These things are inspired and meant to be given by the Spirit of the Lord. I pray that that Spirit will be with you. First story. The Kirtland House of the Lord was dedicated March 27th, 1836. That was a rich Pentecostal experience because of the tremendous outpouring of heavenly power and manifestations. On the day of the dedication, as you'll remember, 6 hymns were sung during that service, one of which became very famous. The Spirit of God, like a fire, is burning. However, there were 2 other William W. Phelps hymns that were sung during that service. Yeah, I think you might know both of them. One, Now Let Us Rejoice, and the other, Adam on Diamond. This unique Latter-day Saint hymn, Adam on Diamond, was published in Emma Smith's first hymnal and titled then, The Earth Was Once a Garden Place. Now, what I didn't know is that hymn became immediately very popular among the saints with the same tune that we sing it to now, a tune that Phelps likely borrowed from a Southern Appalachian folk hymn. Phelps first wrote the poem, Adam on Diamond, and published it in 1835, before the location of Adam on Diamond was even known. He wrote it while living with Joseph and Emma in their home, the newly renovated one, just across from the temple. Now, where and how did Phelps learn the precious truths that abound in that hymn? The most likely and logical answer is that he learned it directly from the prophet Joseph himself, thus making that hymn a revelation. Do we sufficiently remember and appreciate the truths that are taught by this hymn? Namely, that the earth itself as a whole was once a garden place after the fall. And so righteous were men there, men and women there at Adam on Diamond, that the Savior was worshiped face to face. The land of God where Adam dwelt, Adam on Diamond, Enoch's Zion, spread out from there and became famous from east to west. and that when that millennial day comes again, the earth will be returned to what once was Adam-on-Diamond. In other words, Adam-on-Diamond in 1835 was known to be a very special and sacred place. And the saints sung with fervor the glories of Adam-on-Diamond before they even knew where it was or fully what it was. And then in May 1838, the Lord revealed the location of Adam-on-Diamond there in northern Missouri in Doctrine and Covenants, section 116. Now, it's altogether fitting that this hymn was sung and celebrated at the dedication of the Kirtland House of the Lord, because it is only by those keys bestowed in that temple that the latter-day promises and prophecies of Adam-on-Diamond will be fulfilled. Now, I was just there. There's a holy and sacred presence that rests down upon the Kirtland Temple. Similarly, Adam-on-Diamond has a spirit of place that can be aptly described as a temple without a roof. The Lord was and is and will yet be again in both places. Next story. What is required to live the law of sacrifice? Well, this isn't a very popular doctrine, but that's the point. The law of sacrifice is not a comfortable doctrine. It means, at least in part, to live the law of sacrifice. It means to give until we can feel it, give until it hurts. In that regard, please consider the life of Anne Malin Perry Sharp. Anne was born April 10th, 1832 in Barford, Warwickshire, England, the third of 9 children. At the appropriate age, Anne started school, but when her parents couldn't afford to keep her there, she returned home to help care for her younger siblings. On their behalf, Anne learned to knit and to sew. Well, that was still not enough to support the family, so Anne hired herself out as a servant girl at the age of 10. And from then on, she supported herself. She learned the art of good cooking, as well as became skilled in clothing and in design. Well, because she worked among the wealthy, she also learned the manners and etiquette of the cultured and refined. Notwithstanding her lowly station as an English peasant girl, she became a lady of grace and poise, well-fashioned and well-styled. In November 1850, she investigated the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints and was baptized by Elder Thomas Horsley. She was 18. Anne's family, however, didn't follow her. They believed the false reports and were bitter towards her newfound faith. On the 25th of May, 1856, Anne sailed with other saints to Zion. The spirit of gathering took hold of her. Just before leaving for America, she paid a last visit to her beloved family. Family records share this. What must have been her feeling as she walked the streets of Barford, viewing old familiar places and greeting friends of her childhood, perhaps for the last time, bidding a fond farewell to the members of her own family. She left them without telling them that she was sailing to America. She knew that they were antagonistic towards the church and that there would be opposition and hard feelings. And she wanted to part from those most dear to her with only kind words and sweet memories. End of quote. Once in Iowa City, Iowa, Anne was assigned to the Hunt Wagon Company. You'll remember that there was the Willie and the Martin Handcart Companies and the Hunt and Hodgett Wagon Companies all traveling late in 1856. Anne was assigned in the Hunt Company, where she worked as a cook for the Teamsters. Everything was okay at first, but when the winter snows caught them on the high plains of Wyoming, food became very scarce and began to be rationed. Again, the family records state, quote, all were living on very small rations. As Anne handed the men their small ration and saw their suffering from hunger, she prayed to the Lord to take away her appetite, that she might give her ration to help relieve others who were suffering most. Many times in later life, she testified that the Lord answered her prayers, that she could go for days at a time without food, but was never hungry. She said that she couldn't eat while others were suffering for want of food. Moreover, the situation of the suffering immigrants grew more dire as they advanced deeper into the Wyoming winter. As they approached Fort Bridger, certain wagons were designated as ambulance wagons carrying the most ill. The intention was to fast-track these wagons toward Utah. Anne was assigned not as an occupant, but as a nurse to attend the ill in those wagons. Now, one of those wagons was an 8-year-old neglected orphan girl named Maren Johansson. Near Devil's Gate, it had been discovered that Maren's feet were badly frozen. She was rescued, her feet were thawed out, and then turned black. In those ambulance wagons, as they jolted slowly along, the flesh of Maren's feet began to slough off. Can you imagine? The pain had to have been terrible. Anne could not bear to see the little one suffer. She took her from the wagon and, to ease her pain, carried her the rest of the way to Utah, many times through deep snow. That's the law of sacrifice. When we give of our time, our skills, our food, and our very muscles to the aid and comfort of the Lord's children, you know, we serve Him and we exemplify the law of sacrifice. That was the life of Anne Penn Malin Sharp. May we do likewise. Next story. You know, the moment Ira Stern's hatch met the prophet Joseph Smith, it left an impression that carried with him for the rest of his life. Ira was born in Winchester, New Hampshire on February the 9th, 1800, the son of Ira and Lucinda Hatch. Shortly after, the family moved to Cattaraugus County, New York. In January 1824, Ira married Weltha Bradford, and in the years that followed, 6 sons were born to them in Farmersville, New York. In the late fall of 1830, 4 missionaries from the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints passed through the area and preached to the Cattaraugus Indians. Well, Weltha heard them, and she became interested and was the first in the family to read the Book of Mormon and recognize its truth. The couple heard the gospel preached by Oliver Cowdery and Parley P. Pratt. Weltha wanted to be baptized, but Ira persuaded her to wait. Finally, in the winter of 1832, a hole was chopped in the ice and Weltha was baptized. But Ira still remained outside the church. He wanted to meet the prophet Joseph Smith. So he determined he'd go to Kirtland, meet the prophet, and feel the spirit of the man, and might even make a donation of $200 to the Kirtland temple that was under construction. Well, he arrived in Kirtland. Ira inquired for the prophet and was told that he was up in the timber cutting lumber for the temple. Now I quote from the family record. Ira made his way to the place, and as he approached, one of the workmen stuck his axe into the tree and came forward. When close enough to grasp Ira's hand, he, the man, said, "Brother Hatch, I have been expecting you for 3 days. The money you have will be used in building the pulpits in the temple." It was the prophet Joseph Smith. Quoting, "Thus left with no chance for doubt, Ira Stearns Hatch was convinced that Joseph Smith was a true prophet, and the testimony of the divine mission of Joseph Smith was steadfast during the remainder of his life. No one at that time in Kirtland knew Ira Stearns Hatch, nor did anyone know of his intended visit to Kirtland to meet the prophet." End of quote. How did Joseph know? Ira was baptized not long after and stayed with the church for the rest of his days. He settled in Bountiful, Utah, where he died in 1894. And another story. 2 of Ira's sons, Meltier and Orrin Hatch, served in the Mormon Battalion in 1846 and 47. And therein is another remarkable story from that family. Let's take a break. Are you doing okay? I hope you are well. The story I just shared with you about from Ira Stearns Hatch is found in the book Joseph Smith Jr., Testimonies of Those Who Knew Him. If there's someone you know that wants and needs their testimony of the prophet Joseph strengthened, that's the book I recommend. I didn't write it. I collected it from the journals of those who knew Joseph. It's firsthand witnesses. Their witnesses are unimpeachable and reliable. You can get that book at historyofthesaints.org or at Deseret Book. Now, as you know, I just came home from a church history trip with 96 wonderful people that I came to love. I found out this week I'm going back again next May 2025 on a church history, 2 of them actually, back-to-back church history trips for Fun for Less tours from Philadelphia to Nauvoo. If you'd like to come and stand at Adam-on-Diamond with me and hear these stories, go to funforlesstours.com and sign up, or give them a call. Fun for Less Tours, Draper, Utah. Ask for Julie. She'll take care of you. And I also found out this week, I am so excited. It's been a few years since I've been there. Fun for Less is sending me to Alaska, Yukon. I love this tour. Not only is the scenery to die for, but the gold rush history. We're going to go from Anchorage up to Fairbanks and then fly over to the Canadian Yukon and come down the Yukon River and teach the story of the gold rush, the poems of Robert Service. Oh, it's exciting. It's fun. Again, it's with Fun for Less. Give them a call if you'd like to come. Next story. There's a certain courage that belongs to those who are true and faithful to God and principle. Similarly, notwithstanding the allies that they might have or the weaponry that they use, traitors and betrayers will eventually, always and all, turn coward. There is strength in righteousness and being true. Now, by way of background, on October 31st, 1838, Joseph Smith and friends were betrayed by trusted associates into the hands of their enemies. While they were carried away, mobs numbering into the thousands, disguised as militia, swept into the city of Far West, Missouri, looting, raping, murdering, and otherwise committing atrocities unspeakable. The settlement of the Saints, Far West, was sacked, and helpless women and children were forced out of their homes to flee in the face of a coming winter. When those mobs entered the city, witnesses record that they were led by apostates, those who had once been Latter-day Saints, but had turned against the church and taken up the cause against their former friends. With that context, please consider this fascinating family story. October 30th, 1838, there in Far West, in the midst of all of this, Eliza Ann Carter Snow gave birth to a baby girl who weighed only 2.5 pounds. She was named Sarah Jane Snow. At the time of the birth, Eliza was attended by a midwife. Her husband wasn't there. He was away, along with all the other able-bodied men of Far West, building fortifications and working to defend the city against what appeared to be an imminent attack by the mob. And it came. When the mob swept into the city after the prophet's arrest, Eliza was confined with her tiny little babe. And as they did in every other home, the mob suddenly burst into her home without knocking, without welcome or bidding. Their intent, as with the other homes in the city, was to help themselves to whatever they fancied. "Madam," one of the men demanded, "how old is your baby?" To which Eliza retorted, "Reckon it yourself." As she spoke, Eliza looked closer. She recognized the man who had led the mob into her home. The family records state, quote, "She immediately recognized John Farnham Boynton." Now stop. Who's that? Boynton was one of the original members of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles in Kirtland. He had left the church. Quoting, "She immediately recognized John F. Boynton as a former missionary in her home whom they had befriended. She called him by name and reproached him for his apostasy from the truth he had once taught them." Still quoting, "He slunk shamefacedly away, calling to the others to go with him. Through her courageous attitude, she and her baby were saved." The record continues. Many more saints were killed, wounded, or missing, and taken prisoners and forced to live in tents and covered wagons during the ensuing cold weather because their homes had been destroyed. End of quote. Now that's the story of Eliza. Now, your courageous defense of the truth, it may not spare you temporal loss or social humiliation and embarrassment, but it will ensure your eternal gain. And all those who turned against the Lord and his prophets will in a coming day find all their bravado and rhetoric evaporated in the face of light and truth. There's only one happy course, now and into eternity, to be true to the Lord Jesus Christ and his prophets. Next story. In the spring of 1832, Latter-day Saint missionaries Orson Pratt and Lyman E. Johnson came into the area of St. Johnsbury, Vermont. They shared the message of the restored gospel. Following the miraculous healing of Winslow Farr's wife, Olive Hovey Farr, Winslow's two cousins accepted the truth and were baptized into the church. They were James Chauncey Snow and his brother Warren. Now, the family records state this, quote, "The missionary spirit rested upon them, and as soon as the priesthood authority was given them, they made repeated journeys to an adjoining town, leaving the message of the restored gospel. On one of those missions, sometime in the cold Vermont winter of 1835, the two lads were preaching without purse or scrip, meaning they had no money and no supply of food. They went from place to place, dependent upon the kindness of others to feed and shelter them. Family records say they had met much opposition. One night, as they asked for something to eat and a place to lie down to rest from the cold winter, they were turned away 3 times. About 9 o'clock in the evening, they knocked at the door of a house. A lady of motherly appearance opened the door and inquired what they desired. They told her they were hungry and needed a place to rest. To their surprise, she said, "Come in, my boys." This brought the 2 boys to tears because it reminded them of their own dear mother and home. She fed them well and gave them a bed to sleep on. They were very grateful and thanked her kindly the next morning as they left, to which she said, "I have children of my own. They may need something to eat and a place to eat and a place to sleep sometime. I felt it my duty to help you." End of quote. Dear friends, that happened 189 years ago this spring. And though we do not know the dear lady's name, the Almighty who once said, "Whosoever shall give a drink to one of these little ones, a cup of cold water, only in the name of a disciple, verily I say unto you, he shall in no wise lose his reward." Surely the Lord remembers that woman and will reward her accordingly. Kindness, she said it, kindness is indeed a duty, and it does count in heaven. Now, a little bit on the lighter side. I hope you don't mind this story. It might be just a bit irreverent. I would like to tell you the story of a dog I remember. I don't know his name, so for lack of a better name, I'll call him Old Scratch. I first encountered this nondescript mutt in Freedom, Wyoming, many years ago. The first time I saw that dog, I was passing through Freedom on my way out of town going north. He erupted out of his yard and chased my truck down the road for about 100 yards, running as hard as he could go, yapping, barking, growling. When he came to the property line, he slid to a stop, turned around, and trotted back to his yard. That was many years ago. Well, not long ago, I went back through there, and he was still there. Each and every time I drove past that dog's yard in my big rig, he would explode out in fury and come after me like one of the hounds of hell. Now, the last time I saw him, he had gotten considerably older, but he hadn't gotten any slower or any less dedicated to his cause. In fact, he has grown very strong with all that chasing, deep in the chest and strong. Oddly, he doesn't pay any attention to little cars that pass his yard, just the big trucks that lumber by. I guess the big boys are a particular annoyance to him. Also, he never gets really close. He just runs alongside, yapping as though he would devour me. And you can't help but notice, in fact, it's still there, that there's a path that he has carved along that fence line next to the gutter. He never seems to pay any attention when I passed him coming into town. But when I was going out of town, the other way, away from his domain, that's when he went nuts. I've thought a lot about that dog over the years. He has come to epitomize a passionate commitment to a false and wasted cause. He can't physically hurt any of those trucks he chases. And as long as I personally stay away from him, there's nothing he can do. The best he can do is distract me or maybe slow me down. Why does that dog hate big trucks? I don't know. But I have a pretty good idea what he would do to one of those trucks if he got a hold of it. You know, I am talking about a dog, but he reminds me of someone else, passionately dedicated to a wasted cause, who has the power to hurt if I give it to him. Lucifer. Be wary. Be careful. Don't get too close. Last story for tonight. Steadfast. Remember that word? Steadfast. It's a word we don't use much anymore, but it is all over in the scriptures, and we are admonished, you and me, to be steadfast and immovable. Mosiah 5:15. Well, what exactly does that mean? It means, by definition, to be constant, firm, resolute, not fickle or wavering. Like this. This is steadfast. It was early in the morning when the Sanhedrin, the council of the Jews, led Jesus to Pilate, the Roman governor. Why? To condemn him. The Sanhedrin had already sentenced him to death for blasphemy, but under Roman law, they couldn't carry it out. Only Pilate could give that sentence and order. But blasphemy meant nothing to Pilate, so they had to come up with charges of sedition. We found this fellow perverting the nation, Luke records. Well, Pilate knew better. He dismissed them, told them to go settle it themselves. He wanted nothing to do with it. But the Jews insisted. Pilate went back in and questioned Jesus. And after a few minutes, he came back and said, I find no fault in this man. Well, that only made the Jews that much more angry. They became more vehement. They began to accuse him of many things. Jesus just stood firm and said nothing. Upon learning in their rantings that Jesus was a Galilean, Pilate saw a way out. So he sent Jesus to Herod, who had jurisdiction over that northern province. Herod questioned Jesus in many words, but answered him nothing. They dressed him in a purple robe and sent him back to Pilate. Herod too wanted nothing to do with the situation. Well, Pilate called the chief priests, the rulers, and this time the people, and said to all of them, I have examined him before you, have found no fault in this man. I will therefore chastise him and release him. Luke 23:14 and 15. In response, the crowd, the multitude, I'm quoting, the multitude, crying aloud, began to desire him to deliver Jesus unto them. Give us Jesus. Now that's different than the way the biblical texts read. This is a JST change that is very significant. The crowd initially asked for Jesus to be released, not Barabbas. But, quote, the chief priests moved among the people that they should rather release Barabbas unto them. Mark 15:11, JST. Within moments, that crowd went from begging for the Savior's release to chanting, away with him, crucify him. Pilate pleaded again with them to let Jesus go. But now, the whole mob, a conflagration, cried all the louder, "Not this man, but Barabbas." John 18:40. For whatever reason, possibly to invoke their sympathies, Pilate had Jesus scourged, whipped, and then brought forth once more before the people and said, "Behold the man." And once more Pilate said to them, "I find no fault in him." But the people screamed, "He ought to die because he made himself the Son of God." That made Pilate all the more afraid. And twice more he tried to let Jesus go. But when Pilate saw that he could prevail nothing, but rather that a great tumult was made, he took water and washed his hands before the multitude, saying, "I am innocent of the blood of this just person. See that ye do nothing to him." Matthew 27:24. 8 times Pilate, the pagan, sought to release the divine Son of God. But in the end, he bowed to the clamoring crowd who were nothing more than dupes of conniving men. All the while of this debacle, Jesus stood firm, fixed, and constant, steadfast. No crowd ever did, no crowd ever could move him from the course of righteousness. Clamoring crowds, strident majorities, even persuasive, flattering men and women can be, and often are, dangerous. Crowds in these days when everyone is following some strong voice, please ask yourself this question. Notwithstanding how good they look or how great they sound, are the principles they advocate just and true and square with the prophets? Therein is safety. Follow the Lord and the keys. My dear friends, I hope you have a great week. Good night, and God bless.